The wind that cuts through the Tennessee hills has a voice of its own. On winter nights, it moans low, twisting through the trees like a warning. But in the summer of 1817, the bells of Robertson County began to hear something else, something that did not belong to the natural world. It started with a knock, a deliberate, hollow rap against the walls of their cabin. One knock, then another. A sound that could be explained away if not for what followed, because that simple knocking grew into whispers, and the whispers into a voice that claimed it would kill the head of the household, John Bell. And the voice kept its promise. This is not just a ghost story. It is a documented haunting whispered through 2 centuries of folklore, studied by historians, retold in sermons, books, and classrooms. It is America's first and most infamous poltergeist case. The name it left behind would echo for generations: the Bell Witch. To understand how this nightmare began, we must first step into the world of the early 19th century. Robertson County, Tennessee, was young land. Only a few decades had passed since white settlers pushed into the Cumberland frontier. In 1804, John Bell brought his wife Lucy and their growing family westward from North Carolina, drawn by promises of rich farmland. The Bells purchased over 300 acres along the Red River. Dense forest had to be cleared, fields were plowed by hand, with oxen dragging primitive tools. The family built a large log house, solid and practical, its heart a wide stone fireplace. John Bell thrived. His farm produced corn, wheat, and tobacco. His orchard bore fruit. His standing in the community grew, and he became a deacon at the Red River Baptist Church. Neighbors respected him as a God-fearing man. Lucy Bell was known for her kindness and generosity. She bore her children with quiet strength. Their children, Jesse, John Jr., Drury, Benjamin, Esther, Zadok, Elizabeth, called Betsy, and Richard, worked the farm and studied their Bible. From the outside, the Bells were the model of success on the frontier. But prosperity never guaranteed safety, for the wilderness was vast, and in the wilderness, things stir that men cannot control. Imagine Robertson County in the 1810s. The land was beautiful but harsh. Thick stands of oak and hickory stretched for miles. The Red River wound sluggishly through the land, its waters brown and cold. Wolves howled in the distance. Bears still roamed the forests. Neighbors were few and far between, their farms scattered among the rolling hills. Nights were silent, broken only by the cry of whippoorwills and the crackle of firewood. Light came only from the moon or from the lantern flame. It was in this setting that the Bells began to hear the first sounds that belonged neither to man nor beast.
In the late summer of 1817, John Bell was walking his cornfield when he spotted something strange. Just ahead, perched between the rows, was an animal unlike any he had seen before. Some said it was a creature with the body of a dog and the head of a rabbit. Others described it as a monstrous bird. Whatever it was, it did not belong. John raised his musket and fired. The creature vanished into the brush without a sound. From then on, the Bell property seemed haunted by apparitions. Betsy saw a girl in a green dress swinging from a tree branch until she vanished into thin air. A hired hand, Dean, returning home at night, swore that a great black dog followed him through the fields, its eyes glowing like coals. Still, John was a practical man. Strange animals and shadows could be explained away, but soon, explanations would fail. As the days shortened, the Bells began to hear scratching along the outside of their cabin, at first faint, then louder, as though claws scraped against timber. John searched for rats. The children set traps. Nothing was ever caught. Then came pounding, knocks on the walls 3 at a time, knocks that seemed to travel, circling the house. One night, heavy footsteps echoed across the porch. John opened the door with musket in hand. The night outside was still. The steps stopped. He closed the door, and the footsteps began again inside the house. The noises grew bolder, rattling chains across the floor, faint whispers in the dark, wings flapping against the walls. Some nights, the Bells were too afraid to sleep, but the terror was only beginning. It singled out Betsy first, the youngest daughter, bright and pretty, just 12 years old. One night she screamed out from her bed. Her blankets had been yanked away. Something cold had pulled her hair violently. She cried that invisible hands were slapping her face. The family rushed to her side, but there was nothing there, only the sound of her sobs and red marks forming on her cheeks. In the days that followed, Betsy's torment continued. She was pinched, scratched, bruised by unseen forces. Her hair was tied in knots. She sometimes collapsed unconscious, her body covered in welts. The other children, too, began to feel small pinches or hear faint whispers, but Betsy bore the brunt. The house itself had turned against her.
At first, the disturbances were only sounds, knocks, whispers too faint to understand. But as weeks passed, the whispers grew into words. Late at night, a voice rasped through the cabin. It was hoarse, mocking. It called John Old Jack Bell. It sang hymns in a cracked, shrill tone. At times, it quoted scripture word for word, as if taunting their prayers. Neighbors who stayed the night swore they heard the voice as clearly as any living person. It spoke to them directly, mocking some, flattering others. It praised Lucy Bell as the most perfect woman alive, yet cursed John and Betsy with hatred. The voice named itself Kate. Some believed it was the spirit of Kate Batts, a local woman rumored to have quarreled with John Bell over land. Others thought it a demon disguising itself with a familiar name. Whatever it was, the Bell Witch had arrived. Word spread quickly. In rural Tennessee, news traveled on horseback and at church gatherings, but it traveled did. James Johnston, a trusted friend of the Bells, came to investigate. He and his wife spent a night in the cabin. At first, nothing happened. Then the sound of gnawing filled the room, followed by heavy thumps on the bed. Johnston rose and demanded, "In the name of the Lord, what are you?" The voice answered, "I am a spirit. I once lived on this earth." Other visitors followed, ministers, farmers, skeptics. Some left convinced it was trickery, but many swore they heard the disembodied voice for themselves. The witch mocked them with uncanny knowledge, repeating conversations held miles away, or reciting sermons given in churches the Bells had not attended. The Bell home became a dark spectacle, and the witch seemed to thrive on the attention. The torment of Betsy escalated when she entered a courtship with Joshua Gardner, a young neighbor. The couple was well liked, and talk of marriage spread quickly, but the witch would not allow it. Anytime Betsy and Joshua spoke of their future, the voice shrieked obscenities. Betsy was slapped, pinched, bruised. Joshua himself heard the warnings. The witch declared she would not permit the marriage. After months of harassment, Betsy broke off the engagement in despair. She was barely a teenager, yet the entity had robbed her of her peace, her love, and her safety.
While Betsy's body bore the witch's wrath, John Bell's health began to fail. He complained of a strange stiffness in his mouth and throat, difficulty swallowing, twitching of his facial muscles. His breath carried a pungent, garlic-like odor. Some days he grew so weak he could barely walk. The witch mocked him constantly, calling him Old Jack Bell and swearing it would see him dead. The torment seemed personal, directed at John with singular hatred. Neighbors and ministers noted his decline with concern, and all the while the voice laughed. By 1819, the Bell Witch was no longer just a family's private torment, it was a regional legend. Travelers camped outside the Bell farm, hoping to hear the voice. Ministers came to pray and left shaken. The witch could sing hymns in perfect time, then break into mocking laughter. Some nights the house shook with bangs and crashes as though struck by giant fists. Other nights, silence was worse. The waiting, the dread, the knowledge that it would return. Even General Andrew Jackson, then a fiery military hero, is said to have visited the farm. According to legend, his carriage wheels froze on the road near the Bell property. By the Eternal, Jackson swore, this must be the Bell Witch. After a night of terrifying encounters, he allegedly fled, declaring he would rather fight the British again than spend another night with the witch. Whether myth or truth, the story reflects the terror the Bell haunting inspired in all who heard it. By late 1919, the Bells were exhausted. Betsy was broken. John was fading. The voice's witch was louder than ever, taunting the family by day and night. The once prosperous farm was now a place of dread. Neighbors avoided it after dark. Lucy prayed constantly, clinging to her faith. And the witch had made its promise clear. It would kill John. The Bells could only wait and dread what was to come. Fade to black, the voice still echoing. I will have him. Old Jack Bell will die.
The Tennessee winter of 1818 carried with it a weight that no frost or storm could explain. In the quiet valley of the Red River, where the Bell family farm stood, the air itself seemed charged, as though holding its breath. To passing strangers, the land appeared peaceful, rolling fields, blackened trees against a pale sky, and the slow rhythm of a homestead keeping pace with the seasons. But for those inside the Bell house, life had become a relentless trial. The disturbances had begun quietly, almost teasingly. A faint knock at the door when no one stood outside, the sound of gnawing on the bedposts at night, small, almost trivial annoyances that a tired farmer could dismiss as imagination. But by the time the year turned, there was no pretending. The family lived in a state of constant siege. Bed sheets were ripped away in the night. Invisible hands struck the children as they slept. Low growls echoed from the darkness, and disembodied voices whispered their names. Every evening, when the lamps were extinguished, fear settled over the house like a second darkness. John Bell, once a pillar of strength in the community, had no answer for it. The patriarch who could plow a field from dawn to dusk, who could lead prayers at the Red River Baptist Church, now stood powerless. He and Lucy gathered the children at night, offering scripture and prayer, but it seemed that prayer itself only provoked their tormentor. The voice that taunted them was unlike anything they had ever known. At times it spoke softly, like a child. At others, it thundered through the rooms with a force that rattled the very beams of the cabin. It mocked their prayers, reciting them word for word with grotesque mimicry. When Lucy read the Bible, the voice repeated entire passages in sing-song fashion, as though delighted to desecrate the holy words. What chilled the family most was not only the sound, but the knowledge behind it. The witch, as it came to be called, seemed to know things it could not possibly know. It repeated conversations held in secret, revealing private thoughts to the entire household. It described events happening miles away, and more than once, those who doubted returned home to find the voice's words proven true. The Bell children, already frayed by sleepless nights, began to glimpse shapes in the shadows. They spoke of large black dogs with eyes like burning coals pacing the yard, of spectral birds watching from the fence posts, of a pale woman slipping between the trees at dusk. These apparitions never lingered long enough to be seized, but they left behind the certainty that something was watching. News of the hauntings spread quickly through Robertson County. The Bells were respected, and their troubles could not be dismissed as drunken tales or idle gossip. Neighbors came to see for themselves. Some stayed the night in the Bell cabin, determined to unmask the trickery. Many left humbled, and more than a few left terrified.
One of the earliest witnesses was James Johnston, a close family friend. Johnston and his wife agreed to spend a night in the Bell household, hoping to offer comfort. That night, as the family prepared for bed, the house fell silent. Hours passed in stillness, but when the lamps were snuffed and the room lay in darkness, the torment began. Covers were ripped from the beds, slaps cracked against unseen cheeks. Johnston himself was struck and cried out into the night, demanding to know what force plagued them. To his astonishment, the voice answered back, mocking his accent, repeating his own words with cruel amusement. By dawn, the Johnstons left convinced the Bell family was haunted by something not of this world. Richard Williams, another respected neighbor, would later testify to his own experiences. He recalled hearing voices that spoke in languages he did not understand, shifting from English to fragments of hymns, then into what sounded like gibberish. On one occasion, the voice recited his family lineage with startling accuracy, naming relatives living far away. The knowledge unsettled him to his core. Ministers, too, came to confront the mystery. The witch seemed to relish their presence. One preacher began reading scripture aloud, only to have the voice finish the verses for him, mocking his cadence. Another attempted to lead the family in prayer, but the spirit drowned him out with curses so vile that even hardened men admitted they felt chilled. The Bell household was not the only place to suffer its attention. Neighbors reported strange voices echoing in their fields. Travelers along the Red River told of being hailed by an invisible woman, only to find themselves cursed when they ignored her. The witch had grown beyond the confines of one family. It had become a presence that hovered over the entire community. For Betsy Bell, the youngest daughter, the torment was most severe. The witch seemed to single her out with malicious delight. She was slapped, pinched, her hair yanked until she cried. At night, she often awoke with bruises across her face and arms. Her budding romance with a local young man, Joshua Gardner, was relentlessly sabotaged. Whenever the couple spoke of marriage, the witch shrieked threats, vowing that Betsy would never find happiness with him. Eventually, broken by fear and shame, Betsy ended the courtship. The family clung to one another, but each passing day deepened their exhaustion. They were no longer living as farmers, parents, and children. They were survivors of a daily assault that defied reason. The witch had embedded itself into the rhythm of their lives, and all they could do was endure. As the weeks turned to months, it became clear the Bell witch was not content to harass. It sought something more. It wanted domination. It wanted destruction. And above all, it wanted John Bell. By 1819, the Bell Witch was no longer a curiosity whispered about by neighbors. It was a force recognized across the county. People came from miles around to hear the disembodied voice for themselves. Some arrived as skeptics, armed with bravado and certainty that clever trickery was at work. Few left with their doubts intact. The spirit could sing hymns in perfect harmony, shifting voices mid-song as though a chorus were present. It quoted entire sermons, repeating them word for word. It revealed secrets that strangers swore were known only to their families. On one occasion, it described a distant event, a tragedy occurring miles away, that was later confirmed to be true. The more it was challenged, the more it performed. But its favorite sport remained the torment of John Bell.
The man once known as Old Jack had been strong in his youth, but by the late 1810s, he began to suffer strange afflictions. His mouth twisted uncontrollably, his speech slurred. Swallowing grew difficult, as though some invisible hand tightened around his throat. His body convulsed with tremors that no medicine could ease. Each time he struggled, the witch mocked him. "Old Jack Bell is going to die," it announced, gleeful. "I will kill him." Neighbors witnessed his decline and could not deny what they saw. John sat by the fire, his head bowed, his lips trembling with words he could no longer form. Lucy tended to him with quiet devotion, spooning broth he could scarcely swallow, wiping the sweat from his brow. The witch, however, offered her praise. It called Lucy the best woman who ever lived. To her, it showed a strange, twisted reverence, even as it broke the man she loved. By the fall of 1820, John could scarcely leave his bed. His once commanding presence was reduced to a frail shadow. His eyes grew dull, his voice a whisper, and still the witch did not relent. The tale of the Bell Witch had reached far beyond Robertson County. It drew the attention of General Andrew Jackson, the famed hero of New Orleans. In 1819, Jackson and a party of men traveled to the Bell farm, determined to investigate. As their carriage approached the property, the horses suddenly froze. The wheels locked tight as though gripped by an unseen force. No amount of urging or curse could move them forward. Jackson, frustrated, was about to turn back when a shrill voice rang out from the air. "All right, General, you may go on now." The wheels loosened. The horses stepped forward. That night, Jackson and his men camped near the Bell home. They gathered in the parlor, speaking of their determination to uncover the truth. One soldier boasted loudly that he feared no spirit. He carried with him a silver bullet, claiming it would strike down any witch that dared cross him. The witch fell silent. The room grew heavy with tension. Then, without warning, the soldier screamed. He was flung across the room by unseen hands. His body struck again and again. When the assault ended, he stumbled to his feet, battered and pale, begging to leave. Jackson reportedly exclaimed that he would rather face the British Army than endure another night with the Bell Witch. By morning, he and his men departed, leaving the family once again alone. By December of 1820, John Bell lay bedridden, his body ravaged by illness. He slipped in and out of consciousness, his breaths shallow. Lucy searched his medicine cabinet, desperate for anything to ease his suffering. Among the powders and tonics left by physicians, she found a vial filled with a dark liquid she did not recognize. When she asked the witch about it, the voice erupted in laughter. "I gave him a big dose of that last night, and it fixed him." To test the claim, a drop of the liquid was given to the family cat.
The animal convulsed violently and died within minutes. The vial was thrown into the fire, where it burst into a blaze of blue flame. The witch shrieked with delight, "I poisoned old Jack Bell. He is mine."
On the morning of December 20, 1820, John Bell was found lifeless in his bed. His long decline had ended, and the witch had claimed its victory. The family mourned, but the witch did not allow them even that small dignity. It sang songs in a mocking tone, boasting of its triumph. To the community, the question was whispered in hushed voices. Had John Bell been murdered by supernatural means, or had the stress and illness simply consumed him? The Bells buried their patriarch in the family cemetery near the farm. Friends and neighbors gathered to honor him, offering prayers and hymns, but the ceremony was drowned out by the voice of the witch. It jeered at the mourners, singing body-drinking songs, mocking the hymns, and laughing with such force that the gathering dissolved in dismay. Mourners left shaken, some swearing never to return to the Bell property again. The witch had made its point. It had tormented, broken, and destroyed the man it hated most. And even in death, John Bell could find no peace. After John's death, the violence diminished. Betsy remained haunted, particularly over her lost engagement, but the family began to regain some sense of normalcy. By April of 1821, the witch announced it was leaving. It promised to return in 7 years. When it did reappear in 1828, it visited briefly with John Bell Jr., speaking on matters of faith and prophecy before vanishing again. It claimed it would return in 107 years, an ominous date that would have been 1935. No documented accounts survived from that year. For the Bells, the nightmare had ended, but the scars remained. John Bell was gone, Betsy's youth was shattered, and the community of Red River would never forget the terror that had walked among them. The death of John Bell was the climax of the haunting, the moment when whispers of a mischievous spirit hardened into the legend of a murderous witch. Whether by poison, by illness, or by some inexplicable force, the patriarch of the Bell family was gone, and the entity had claimed responsibility. But the story did not end with his grave. The aftermath, theories, explanations, and the enduring legacy of the Bell Witch would linger for generations.
When John Bell's body was lowered into the earth on that cold December day of 1820, a heavy silence fell across the Red River Valley. For years, the land had been alive with whispers, songs, screams, and shrieks that seemed to rise from the very air. Now, after the patriarch's death, that cacophony seemed to recede. The Bell Witch, who had boasted of poisoning him, grew quieter. But silence did not mean peace. The Bell family tried to return to a semblance of life. Fields had to be tilled, livestock tended, children raised, yet the shadow of the haunting clung to them. Each corner of the cabin seemed etched with memory, the spot where covers were ripped away, the hearth where hymns were mocked, the bed where John Bell suffered. Neighbors who had once flocked to witness the witch's tricks now visited less often. The farm carried a stigma, a weight of dread. Some claimed they could still hear faint voices when they passed by. Others swore the very trees leaned differently along the property, as if the land itself remembered. Betsy Bell, once full of youthful hope, bore the deepest scars. The witch had ruined her engagement to Joshua Gardner, mocking and threatening until the relationship collapsed. Though she would eventually marry another man later in life, those who knew her said she was never the same. Her laughter quieted. Her eyes seemed older than her years. She carried the memory of that voice like a wound that never healed. By the spring of 1821, the entity made an announcement. Its mission was complete. It had killed John Bell, it had tormented his family, and now it was leaving. But the farewell came with a promise, or a threat. It told the bells it would return in 7 years. True to its word, in 1828, it reappeared briefly. This time, however, it seemed changed. Its focus was not cruelty, but conversation. It appeared to John Bell Jr., engaging him in long discussions about morality, philosophy, and even prophecy. Some accounts claim it spoke of wars yet to come, including the American Civil War. After several weeks, it vanished once again, declaring it would return in 105 years. If that promise was sincere, the next visitation would have occurred in 1935, yet no clear records exist of a resurgence. Some say the witch returned, but remained quiet, its presence felt only by a select few. Others believe the entity's time had passed, its fury tied only to the Bell family of the 1800s. Still, in Robertson County, the old fear lingered. Even without new manifestations, the legend lived on in hushed tones and wary glances at the shadows. As the story of the Bell Witch spread beyond Tennessee, explanations began to emerge. Skeptics, historians, and storytellers each offered their own theories, none entirely satisfactory, all feeding the mystery.
Theories of the haunting. 1. Family feud and vengeance. Some historians suggest the witch was not a spirit at all, but a legend born of human conflict. John Bell had once been embroiled in a land dispute with a neighbor, a woman named Kate Batts. Though records are murky, some locals believed she accused Bell of cheating her. Over time, whispers tied her name to the witch. They said the entity was Kate, returned from beyond to torment Bell in death for his deceit in life. But there are problems with this theory. Kate Batts lived for years after John Bell's death. She was eccentric, yes, outspoken and unusual for a woman of her time, but there is little evidence she had any supernatural influence. Still, the name stuck. To this day, many call the Bell Witch Kate. 2. Mass hysteria. Another theory is that the haunting was a case of mass hysteria. In the early 19th century, isolated communities often turned to superstition to explain hardship. Strange noises, illnesses, and misfortunes could easily be woven into tales of witchcraft. Once neighbors began repeating their experiences, the story fed itself. But this theory struggles to account for the sheer number of witnesses. Hundreds of people reportedly heard the voice, including respected community members and even ministers. Could so many have been deceived by fear alone? 3. Fraud or trickery. Skeptics argue that the haunting was nothing more than elaborate fraud. Perhaps children played pranks, or a disgruntled neighbor engineered noises to frighten the family. The disembodied voice might have been produced by someone skilled at ventriloquism. Yet the persistence of the activity, the knowledge displayed by the entity, and the sheer consistency of testimony make fraud difficult to prove. For over 3 years, the Bell family lived under relentless torment. Few hoaxes could endure such scrutiny. 4. Supernatural entity. For believers, the simplest explanation remains the most chilling. The Bell Witch was real. An entity, intelligent and malicious, targeted the Bell family for reasons we may never fully understand. Its knowledge of private details, its predictions, its cruelty, all point to something beyond human explanation. Cultural legacy. Whether one believes in ghosts or not, the Bell Witch left an indelible mark. The legend became one of America's earliest and most enduring haunting stories.
Travelers carried the tale far beyond Tennessee, embellishing it with each retelling. Newspapers of the time reported the events with a mix of fascination and skepticism. By the late 19th century, the Bell Witch was a fixture of Southern folklore, passed down through generations. In 1894, a local physician named M.V. Ingram published an authenticated history of the famous Bell Witch. His book, though colored by hearsay and embellishment, preserved many of the first-hand accounts that would otherwise have been lost. It is largely thanks to Ingram's work that the story survived in such detail. The Bell Witch also seeped into popular culture. It inspired plays, novels, and eventually films. The 1999 movie The Blair Witch Project, though set in Maryland, borrowed heavily from the Bell Witch legend. Countless documentaries, books, and podcasts continue to retell the story, each version adding new shadows. In Robertson County, the legacy is more tangible. Near the original Bell property lies the Bell Witch Cave, a limestone cavern said to be linked to the haunting. Today, it is a tourist site where visitors report strange sensations, disembodied voices, and even the sound of footsteps echoing in the dark.
Whether these experiences are imagination or continuation of the old curse, the cave stands as a reminder. The witch's presence has not been forgotten. One question lingers above all. Why John Bell? If the entity was real, its fixation on him seems deliberate. It tormented the children, mocked the neighbors, even conversed with ministers. But its hatred for Bell was personal, focused, and merciless. Perhaps the story of Kate Batts holds a grain of truth, that Bell wronged someone and the spirit of vengeance clung to him. Perhaps it was tied to the land itself, and Bell was merely unfortunate enough to awaken it. Or perhaps it was never about reason at all. Some forces, if they exist, are simply cruel. The witch made its claim clear. I killed old Jack Bell. That boast still chills the valley, because if true, then the Bell Witch remains one of the only entities in American folklore to openly confess to murder. 2 centuries have passed since the Bell Witch terrorized a Tennessee farm. The world has changed beyond recognition, yet the story refuses to fade. Travelers still report unease near the old Bell property. Some claim to hear whispers in the cave, to feel unseen hands brush their shoulders, to see flickers of shadow in the corner of their eyes. The legend remains alive not only in books and films, but in the very soil of Robertson County. Perhaps that is the true power of the Bell Witch. Not the slaps, the screams, or even the death of John Bell, but the way the story endures, a tale so chilling, so inexplicable, that it refuses to be buried. They say that on cold winter nights, when the wind slips across the Red River Valley, you can still hear it, the faint echo of a woman's laughter drifting through the trees. Was it a trick of fear? A tale spun by neighbors and children that grew into a legend? Or was it something darker, an intelligence that once walked among the living and claimed a man's life with its unseen hand? The truth lies buried with old Jack Bell, but legends have a way of never staying silent. And so, the next time you hear a knock at your door in the dead of night, when no one stands outside, when the wind is still, when the world itself holds its breath, ask yourself, is it just the night, or is it the witch returning once again?